All right, welcome back to the channel. So, a lot of stuff went on last week between Terence Crawford and Gary Russell Jr. And the most important thing that happened is that Terence Crawford made excuses all week about why he wouldn't fight him. Cut to the chase on this video, okay? Now, obviously, Mark Davis came out and said something about Gary Russell Jr. Another guy that was connected to it said something about Gary Russell Jr., right? So now it's team up on Gary Russell Jr., and that's cool. I can understand why people would have issue with Gary Russell Jr., but that doesn't mean that Gary Russell Jr. shouldn't have the right to fight Terence Crawford. And I'm still wondering when exactly and who exactly Terence Crawford fans think the guy should fight. Because last I checked, everybody that talks about fighting him, other than Errol Spence Jr., is not good enough to fight him. But yet he's not fighting anybody. So I'm confused. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So like I said in the preamble to this video, we've been having a lot of going back and forth about Gary Russell Jr. and Terence Crawford. Now, before I get into what my message is on this, I've heard that Mark Davis said that Terence Crawford ate the shot from Gary Russell Jr. He didn't break his jaw, right? Even though I find that interesting that Terence Crawford didn't say he didn't deny that he got his jaw broke. But whatever, still, whatever, Mark Davis said, nah, I got done whooping you, Gary Russell, and you were out there, shooting wolf tickets or whatever. You sucker punched him, and he's, all of that stuff, right? I got it. Now, here's my question. Who is Terence Crawford going to fight? And how many times are we going to hear that people are not worthy of fighting him? Like, how many? You know what I mean? Like how many? For a guy, and I like Terence Crawford very much, and I've been very supportive of Terence Crawford over the last couple months because number one, I believe he is pound for pound the best fighter in the world. I believe that. And the reason that I believe that is I think that he's the most well-rounded fighter when you look at the 4 scoring criteria of boxing. He has won belts in multiple weight divisions, telling you that his style and his strength carries across weight divisions, right? He's one of 2 male fighters in the world right now that have been active fighters that have been an undisputed champion in a weight class, along with that being the 140-pound weight class, along with Alexander Usyk, who was undisputed at cruiserweight, right? Think he's the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world. I've got him as the number 2 welterweight. I think he beats everybody at welterweight except for Errol Spence Jr. Hold him in terrifically high regard. Also, I started doing a video project about Terence Crawford. So I watched all his fights. I did a lot of research about him coming up, and I love his story. I think that this guy is somebody, he was actually very fortunate to be discovered because, there's situations where, it could have not panned out for him, right? But it panned out for him. Big time credit to Terence Crawford. But the dude still's got to fight. He's still got to fight somebody, okay? He's still got to fight somebody. When I say, hey, let's fight Sean Porter, Terence Crawford said, I don't want to fight Sean Porter. Sean Porter's my friend, or nobody's going to force me to fight Sean Porter, right? Or if you say, hey, what about Ray Robinson? Nah, man, not Ray Robinson. Ray Robinson, he lost, he beat me. How many people have Ray Robinson lost to? And right? Because he went into Gary Russell Jr. and he went into Ray Robinson. And my thought is, dude, who are you? Come on, man. You ain't fighting nobody at 147. Amir Khan? Why is Ray Robinson any worse a fight than Amir Khan? How many losses did Amir Khan have? You know what I mean? Like, how many? How is Ray Robinson a worse fight than Jose Benavidez? Jose Benavidez took buckshots to the knee. You know what I mean? I can understand Jeff Horn, but still, Jeff Horn, so what? Igis Kalvanakis, so what? Igis Kalvanakis drew with Ray Robinson. So my thing is, dude, who are you gonna fight? I mean, like, I can understand there being difficulties with fights actually, manifesting themselves, right? Saying like, yeah, I'll fight Sean Porter, but the fight doesn't come through because of this, that, or the other thing. Or yeah, I would fight Ray Robinson, but the fight won't come through for this, that, or the other thing. But just to stand there and say you were not going to fight him, because I'm like, Why not? You ain't fighting nobody. I mean, it's not like you got a Manny Pacquiao fight coming up next, or an Errol Spence Jr. fight coming up next, or a Sean Porter coming up next, or a Keith Thurman coming up next, or Manny or any of these guys that you would say that you want to fight. None of these guys are coming up. So what are you pshawing Gary Russell Jr. for? Right? So like, and this is something, shout out to BFTB, because BFTB was, going in on this real hard, and I agree with him 100%. He's like, look, man, Gary Russell Jr. has every right in the world to go up there and get beat up. Why can't Gary Russell go to 147? Like, I hear everybody saying, oh, he's going to get smoked by Terence Crawford, and I agree. I think he's going to get smoked by Terence Crawford. I don't think he can beat Terence Crawford, but I also thought Amir Khan was going to get smoked by Terence Crawford, and Amir Khan didn't have a chance with Bud Crawford. I also thought Julius Ndungo didn't have a chance with Bud Crawford, and he was going to run through Julius Ndungo too. I thought the same thing about Igis Kalvanakis. I thought the same thing about Jose Benavidez. What's the difference? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, what's the difference between Bud fighting a bunch of other people that ain't got a shot and him fighting Gary Russell that ain't got a shot? Literally, what's the difference? I mean, there's nothing wrong with Gary Russell Jr. as an undefeated 126-pound fighter saying, hey, man, I want to move up to 147. I want to fight Bud. Ridiculing him out of the fight. How is that fair? You know what I'm saying? Just like people, that's because that seems like what people are doing to Gary Russell Jr. You're just trying to ridicule him out of the fight. No, man, let the dude fight. Nobody is fighting Gary Russell Jr. at 126. What's he supposed to do? Josh Warrington won't fight him. Leo Santa Cruz won't fight him. Shakur Stevenson ain't fighting him. Navrati ain't about to move up and fight him. Monster Inoue ain't going to fight him. None of those guys are going to fight him. So what is this? Gary Russell Jr. doesn't get to fight? You know what I'm saying? Like, what rule in boxing says you can't move up from 126 pounds to 147 pounds? What rule? Roy Jones Jr. moved up from 168 to heavyweight, didn't he? Or he moved from light heavyweight up to heavyweight, didn't he? Right? He actually wound up moving from, I think his first fight was at 154 and getting all the way up to heavyweight. Why can Roy Jones Jr. challenge John Ruiz, but Gary Russell Jr. can't challenge Terence Crawford? I mean, Deontay Wilder just fought a guy that's 50, 60 pounds heavier than him at heavyweight. I mean, what is this? What is this? You're too small, so therefore we're not going to consider. I can understand it if Terence Crawford has something else to do, but Terence Crawford ain't got nothing else to do. I mean, there ain't no good fight coming up for Terence Crawford. You know what I'm saying? Like, I guarantee you the next fight for Terence Crawford would have been Alexander Putin, but Alexander Putin got stripped because he popped dirty. So, next fight off the line for my dogs. Sorry about that. My dog started barking in the middle of my video. It's been a tough week, man. Tough week. Oh, but anyway, man, so back to it. So look, what's wrong with that? Really? I have no problem whatsoever with Gary Russell Jr. going up to fight Terence Crawford. He's a WBC world champion. He is an excellent fighter. It's not like he's some, like, this is like, that would be some DAZN card where he doesn't know how to get it. He can get into the ring and not know how to defend himself, like that Sinessa, whatever that fight was, it was on DAZN. So I'm having a hard time understanding. Let me put it this way. I completely understand why people would say Gary Russell Jr. can't beat Terence Crawford. But I do think it's highly inappropriate to disaccount this dude and act as if he shouldn't have the ability to have that fight, right? And for multiple reasons, like Guillermo Rigondeaux and Vasily Lomachenko, right? There's a fight. Now that size difference wasn't actually, probably the size difference is probably about the same, right? Because you have Guillermo Rigondeaux, who's already a blown up 118 pounder, right? Fighting for championships at 120, who has to go past 126 to 130 to fight Vasily Lomachenko. Now, he lost the fight in a fight that I thought he just threw. Like, yeah, my hands up. I made it 5 rounds. My hands out. I'm out. Right? But why did Guillermo Rigondeaux take that fight? Because nobody would fight him. And Abner Mares wouldn't fight him. Leo Santa Cruz wouldn't fight him. Scott Quigg wouldn't fight him. Carl Frampton wouldn't fight him. If Josh Warrington was there to say, well, Josh Warrington's a weight class up, but those guys, they wouldn't fight him. They all left 122 pounds to try to get away from Guillermo Rigondeaux. And Guillermo Rigondeaux couldn't get a major fight from the time that he beat Nonito Donaire all the way till he had to go to 130 pounds to get a paycheck. I supported that not because I thought that Vasily Lomachenko, that he was going to beat Vasily Lomachenko, right? I did it because how else is he going to get a paycheck? Now, if Gary Russell Jr. is not given the opportunity to fight Terence Crawford, exactly who is he going to be able to fight, right? Nobody. Because you're just going to laugh off and joke off every attempt at a fight that he asked to get with people that might actually fight him, right? Because the guys at 126 pounds aren't going to fight him. The guys at 130 pounds are not going to fight him. Miguel Berchelt's not going to fight him because he's going to beat Miguel Berchelt. Miguel Berchelt's already looking at Oscar Valdez. Oscar Valdez had the WBO belt at 126 pounds and never had any thought about fighting Gary Russell Jr. So, like for me, man, I understand the comedy around it, right? Like somebody broke their jaw, and I had fun with it for several days, and I'm gonna keep having fun with it. I'm gonna have fun with it if it comes back up again. Because hey, man, that's what's going on in boxing right now. That's the best we have right now until these fights kick off. But I can appreciate the back and forth. Gary Russell Jr. broke your jaw. Oh, no, you didn't. You got whooped by Mark Davis, and all of that fun stuff that goes on. Because all that he said, she said, back and forth, and I think it's fun. Whatever. I could be petty. I don't have any problem with that stuff, right? And I don't have any problem with people saying Gary Russell Jr. can't beat him. But I do have a problem with people acting as if Gary Russell Jr. doesn't deserve the fight, or that Terence Crawford should be able to just blow the shit off. Like, don't nobody care. Who cares? I'm out. Get out of my face. I'm not interested in you. Who are you interested in then? You know what I'm saying? Like, who exactly are you interested in, Terence? Nobody. You know what I'm saying? You're not interested in anybody. Anybody that will actually want to fight you. Terence Crawford isn't interested in fighting anybody that wants to fight him other than Errol Spence Jr. It's like as soon as you call out Terence Crawford, all of a sudden you don't deserve a fight with him. You know what I mean? It's just crazy. Anyway, it is what it is. You let me know what you think in the comment section, man. And with that, I'm out. Peace.